Well, we'll miss you, Roger. Welcome to the superpilotish channel. My name is Graham Wilson, and today in my basement, I'm going to do a little bit of a tribute here to a pilot that passed away a couple of weeks ago, and he was a really good guy. So, anyways, I'm going to talk about Roger Deschamps, and I, it's one of those things about funerals. I absolutely hate funerals. I don't even want to go to my own, but but it's just like, what? And they always ask, do you have something you'd like to say? So I was thinking about Roger there, and it's like that guy told me so many stories over the years. It's like, which one do you pick? So I figured I would probably put this little video out. Maybe somebody that knows Roger or the new Roger, or maybe his family sees this or something. And well, maybe you'll hear the stories too that he told me. Now, I don't know how true they were. They're so weird that they're probably true. So I don't know how many times Roger came in. I used to be the chief flight instructor at the Windsor Flying Club, and Roger had kept his plane out there for a while, and before he sold it, I went flying with him once. Yeah, he was really good, and it's just like he would just come in, light up the room with his smile, and he'd just say something, and then it'd be like, you'd be like, "What, Roger? Really?" Oh yeah, it was always like that. Oh yeah, So I'll just go over kind of like what I knew about Roger. So he grew up living pretty much right next door to the Windsor Airport here in Windsor, Ontario. And and I never really knew exactly. I didn't do the math in my head how old he was, but I was looking at his obituary, and he was born in 1936. So when they started training people how to fly at the Windsor Airport here for World War II, he would have been 4, 5, 6, something like that. So you kind of remember a few things. But he was saying that they always loved seeing the airplanes coming and going and stuff like that. And he lived right next to the property of the airport, and there was no fences or security or anything. You just walk over and see all the planes. Stay away from the propellers. And then he was saying that he always wanted us. They would pay the local kids to start the airplanes, but you had to be 12. Couldn't start an airplane until you were 12. That's what Roger told me. So he wasn't old enough to start the airplanes, but they could still hang around. And yeah, can you imagine that, paying a kid? Because the old airplanes, they used a lot of tiger moths and fleet finches, fleet fawns, something like that. It was like old biplanes kind of thing, and they had no electrical system, so they just turned on the magnetos and contact, boom. 12-year-olds would start the airplanes, but Roger couldn't do that. But he could do the next best thing, and like he'd get with his buddies and stuff, and he said they'd go over there, and they would crash a lot of airplanes when they were training. So he said they lined them all up along the train tracks and just kind of forgot about them. Oh, they crashed that plane. Okay, bring another one in. So there's all these ones with bent wings and all this other stuff, but a lot of it was made out of wood. So he went over there. Him and his buddies they got their saws out, and they're like sawing sawing apart these like tiger moths and these old planes, and they're taking all the parts apart. And then he went back. They carried him back and put him upstairs in the barn where he lived. And apparently, years later, like this stuff probably would have been worth some money. Like years later, he just threw it up in the barn and sat there forever. And so one day he wanted to go back and take a look, because he said he had seats and like instrument panels and all this other stuff would be really collectible, or if it's functional, pretty useful, worth some bucks. But they just threw it out back then. And it turns out his mom cleaned out the barn and threw it all out in the garbage. So he didn't like that too much. But so that was when he was a kid. He was always involved with airplanes. And then so he ended up getting a job. From what I could tell, from what I remember, you see, that's one of the things about at the airport. A lot of times you go there and you don't want to talk about what you do for a job. You just want to talk about airplanes, because this is okay. Forget about the job, forget about the family, all that stuff. I got to keep my mind off that. I'm flying airplanes. So the only thing I could put together is that he used to work like an excavator or some kind of loading thing. I'll call it an excavator because some of my stuff might be inaccurate in my head or whatever, but that's what he was. But he said that he really hated it because he used to work this old ancient excavator that was all noisy and shaky, and he just always described it had great big huge levers and stuff like that to move things. So it was an excavator that worked on like pulleys and cables rather than a hydraulic one. So he said it was always hard, and he'd get arthritis in his shoulder and stuff like that. And he worked pretty hard. And then he saved up a big nest egg, he said, and figured when he retired he'd just fly his plane and play golf. And then he said, yeah, you get that big nest egg when you retire, and then it just kind of goes away. First, I couldn't do golfing, and like I can barely afford my plane now. So, financial advice from Roger. So, and then talking to him about his airplane, he always got kind of like the VIP parking because he was around for the longest, and he parked right next to the club. Didn't have to walk as far. So yeah, so Roger was one day I was talking to him about his plane. Now his plane was I forget the exact year, but it was a Cessna 150 with OmniVision. Ooh, do you know what OmniVision is? It's a back window. It's like that's what Cessna made it sound really cool back in the 60s. It's like all right, we don't have a back window in our planes, and other people do have that. Let's call it OmniVision. There we go. So he had the plane with the OmniVision, and he also had like a kid seat in the back. So it's a Cessna 150, which is a 2-seat airplane, but there was an option to get the kid seat in the back. And he said, yeah, you can put 2 people and 2 kids in the back seat and a mouthful of gas. That's what he used to say. So, but I think back then they used to fly overweight all the time. But yeah, so he bought this plane, and I was asking him like when he learned how to fly and other stuff like that, and some things weren't like adding up. So I was like, "Wait, so you bought this plane here? Okay, so that wasn't your first plane, right? No, no, no. Okay, well, so your first plane, what was that one?" He says, "Oh, I bought my first plane in I don't know, I forget the year, 1963." It's like, "Well, but you bought this one here, and you said you bought it right after you got your license, and then like." What? It didn't quite make sense to me. So he said, "Oh no, I bought my first plane before I learned how to fly." So I was flying that around for a bit, and I thought, well, I better take some lessons and learn how to do this right. I'm like, what? Yeah, so it turns out he bought some plane off of some farmer out in the county here, and he just flew it off this farmer's farm and parked it in the barn, like, and then he figured out, oh, I better take some lessons. So oh, and even his lessons had like an interesting little twist to it because he was telling me once that he learned how to fly at the Windsor Flying Club before it's in its current location. It was over in the big hangar that they used to train for people in World War II, and now it's the Canadian Aviation Museum. But he said one time he was up flying with his instructor, and actually, I just remembered another one there too. His instructor wouldn't go flying with them unless he brought him a 6-pack of beer before the lesson. That's right. I forgot about that. He's like, yeah, the instructor wouldn't fly with me unless I showed up with a cold 6-pack of beer for him. So the instructor started drinking beer and flying with Roger. So, oh, hey, Shecky. So I forgot about that. Yeah. Like, I don't know this guy. So one day they're flying around, and he said there was this big storm coming. I don't know if it was a tornado or just a big storm. I'm not too sure. I'm not sure of the year either. But he said they're flying around. The wind was really picking up, and the sky was looking black. So they just made it back to the airport, and so the instructor like wanted to get in to the hangar. So he said they just like the hangar doors were open, and the instructor just taxied the plane right into the hangar with the engine running, shut it down, and they all ran, and they were hiding underneath desks and stuff like that, desks and tables in the corner, and and it was he said they were just like scared to the point of of fecal material exiting their bodies. We'll put it that way. So yeah, and then turns out they were in there, and the roof ripped, part quarter of the roof ripped off in the corner. So they're lucky they got the plane back in the hangar. But I just imagining that, just taxiing right in because you don't do that. It's not too safe. But Yeah, so he got this other plane, and then there was another time he was telling me, and I don't know if he ever got his float rating. I think he did. So he was telling me that he would go up to this little town called Bisco Tasting, and the Bisco Tasting is this little kind of hunting fishing town north of Sudbury. Actually, let's get out Roger's map. This is how Roger used to navigate. He had one of these in his airplane. So, yeah, so let's just say I want to go up to Bisco Tasting. That's in Northern Ontario. Let's take a look here. I was wondering how far Biscuit Tasting is to Sudbury. I've been through there, and you can only get there by train or some really, really rough bush road. Actually, that's not even on the map. Okay. Now, where's Sudbury? Oh, wait, here we go. Yeah, Sudbury. Because I know it goes up to Chapleau. What do we got here? 144. Oh, here we go. I gotta look here. Trying to see how far there is a point to this. Sultan, Chapleau. Okay, yeah, so yeah, Biscuit Tasting is right there on the Biscuit Tasting River. Okay, so how far would that be? 30, maybe about 30, 40 miles, maybe. So maybe about 40 miles north of Sudbury. That's my guess on the map. And so there's only a train track going there, and it's just this little tiny train that goes on. And so he said he would take an airplane, and on the weekends, like he would work up there on the weekend, and then kind of fly back to Windsor. I forget exactly how it happened, but he was saying that what they would do is they'd have to go into town to get supplies on the weekend, no matter what, because everyone came up to go fishing for the week package or whatever. And then so he said, doesn't matter what the weather was, you just went. And I'm like, well, what if the ceiling's really low? What if the visibility is no good, Roger? And he would say, oh, you just follow the train tracks, takes you right to Sudbury. And then, well, okay, I know in Sudbury you can land at, oh, what's the lake in Sudbury? There used to be a float plane base there. Now it's at Whitewater Lake in Azilda. Oh, come on, I can't remember. Lake Ramsey Lake. Yeah. So, yeah. So you could park your plane down there and then go get some groceries or whatever. But he was saying that like, yeah, you just follow the train tracks, and I'm like, well, like, what do you mean? What if you can't get up high enough? He says, no, you just get down on the train tracks, 4 or 5 feet off the ground, and just follow the. I'm like, wait, so you're like, there can be a train coming, Roger? He's like, oh yeah. It's like, well, I'm thinking they must have like once the train passed, then they could fly down the train tracks. But he said, oh yeah, they all did it up there, and like, what? And then so yeah, so he would do that, and if I remember correctly, he would come down here to Windsor too. And so he would just follow the highways. So it'd be like, okay, let's take Highway 11 down and then hang a right at the 401. And he said, yeah, you just follow the highways. And if the weather's bad, you just get right down there. And yeah, you're 50 feet off the ground. You won't hit no traffic. And like, you're going to fly all the way back from Sudbury, 50 feet off the ground, following a highway, Roger? Oh, yeah, we did it all the time. And then I was thinking about where the 401 goes through in Toronto. And I was like, Roger, that goes right by Pearson. Like, that's a big airport. And he's like, oh, but yeah, they can't see it though. It's like, oh man. All right, you survived. And then, so that was like the guy. And then another thing, he got me thinking, like, I don't know exactly how he navigated. Because I know one time he was flying with Kevin, Kevin was telling me about Roger. He's like, they were going somewhere, and they Kevin and Roger used to fly together in their little planes, and he said Kevin looked over once and Roger was flying, and he had the map out like right in front of the windshield, not even looking out and just reading the map. And Kevin was like, whatever. So yeah. So another time Roger said he was flying he went down to Florida, I guess, in his plane, and he said he was going through Kansas. Because like he didn't want to go over all the mountains or the hills in Tennessee and Kentucky and all that. So he didn't want to get up that high. So he thought he'd take the long way around where it's slower and go through Kansas. So he got lost in Kansas because he was like, yeah, once you get to Kansas, all these towns, they all look the same. So, I got kind of lost there, but I saw an airport, so I landed there and I asked him where I was. Like, can you imagine that? Like, oh, I don't know where I am. There's an airport. I think I'll just land and get some gas and go. And I don't know, man. So that's how he went down to Florida. And I think he used to follow highways too, or something, because there was someone else that was flying to Florida hanging around at the airport one day. And Roger said to him, "Oh, you're going to Florida? What side?" And it's like, "Oh, yeah, like the East Coast." And Roger's like, "Oh, so if you're flying down there East Coast, I-95, that's what you got to follow, right?" So I don't know if Roger went down there or he was following the interstates trying to get somewhere, but he never got lost except for Kansas. But then he asked for directions. So yeah, the other thing there too, he was telling me about how oh, hey, Wrench. Yeah, so Roger, one time, he was taking his plane up to get the annual inspection done on it, and so he was saying that Roger didn't have an instrument rating, but he did fly IFR, as I've told you. I follow roads, I follow railways, but so Roger was going up to I follow rivers if you're way up north. But he always just followed the coastline to go up to where he got his to get his annual done. And he said he was flying, and then there was a little bit of clouds, and he was getting a little bit lower. He said, "I'll just go over the clouds." So eventually, Roger got. Now he had no GPS. He didn't have anything. He's just like, "Oh, I'll just keep flying this heading here." And then so after a little while, he was thinking, "Oh, I don't know where I am, so I'll just pop through the clouds here really slow and see what happens." So he went, and he said that he went down underneath the clouds, and then he's like, "Yeah, so it's about 50 feet off the water." And I looked around, there's no land. So like he flew, he went like right over the lake and just like popped through the clouds, and there was like he's in the middle of the lake and couldn't see any land. I was like, "Oh my God, Roger, what'd you do?" And like, I don't know what the ceiling was. He said 50. I forget the exact altitude, but it's not fun to find yourself over top of a lake at 50 or 100 feet or anything. And then so he said, "Oh, no problem. I just headed east, and then I found the shoreline, and I knew where I was." And they got into his airport he had to get to, like another time with like 100-foot ceiling or whatever it was. So yeah, but I think that one did scare him a little bit because he says, "Yeah, you do that once." So I don't think he ever did it again. And then so so he did a lot of flying, and it was kind of like I could kind of tell that he was almost getting. I don't know. Most good pilots will they'll figure out at one point, nah, I don't think I'm safe. I don't think I can do this anymore. And Roger actually did that, but there was a few little signs that he wasn't uh, quite up to snuff for some little things. He could still fly the plane fine. I'll tell you about that later. But yeah, but I just thought it was kind of funny. Sometimes he'd listen to him get on the radio, and he'd go flying with Kevin, his buddy Kevin, and so one time he was asking for a taxi clearance from the control tower. And so they were going to go somewhere for breakfast, or I forget what it was. And it was like, yeah, yeah, I'd like to request a taxi. And then the control tower says like, "Oh, okay, where are you going to today?" And then Roger, there's a little bit of a pause, and Roger's like, a taxi to wherever Kevin's going." I was listening to this, and I was a student, and I'm like, "Yeah, don't do that." So yeah, so I don't know. He said he did did admit to me near the end. He was like, "Yeah, you kind of forget what runway they want you to put you on, but you just ask again." It was like, so he could kind of, and it was getting hard for him to get in and out of the airplane. But when he did, oh, that was another thing that he was. Uh, I don't know if he was flying with Kevin at the time, but he used to go in all these little grass runways around here. There was a lot more back in the day, and it would be him. I don't know. He did have a buddy, Frank Doolittle, Ed, Kevin, I forget, but they'd go in all these little grass strips. But what happens a lot of times if you go into these little grass runways is that you'll go down for breakfast or something. So it's first thing in the morning. It's it's pretty cool, and you go into this little grass runway. It's nice. You hang out, you talk airplanes all morning, and now it heats up, and your takeoff distance is going to be a little bit more than it would have been a few hours before when it was colder. So one time Roger was coming back from one of these breakfasts that was out there, and the control tower told him to go around and said, like, hey, I see something hanging off of your airplane. And then so Roger went around, and then they kind of Roger was looking down. He said he couldn't see anything from where he was flying. And then so he went by the control tower again, and the control tower said, yeah, there's still something hanging off of your airplane. And Roger thought, oh, well, I'll just land. What can it be? So he ends up lands okay, taxis around. So he taxis back, shuts down the airplane, goes up, and he had a great big stalk of corn stuck on the landing gear. So like he's flying around the corn hanging off his landing gear. And I was like, Roger, how did you get corn on your landing gear? He said, yeah, the takeoff was a little close. It's like, yeah, I think you used up like all the runway there, Roger, and took out some corn on the way out. Now that's close, but still, Roger did fine there. And so he turned eventually. I got another story I wrote down here too. See, this is why I couldn't do this at a funeral, because it's like, which one do you pick? Another time I was talking to him about there's an airport around here that they call on the map the Harrow Airport, but it's really not. And don't try to land there. Somehow it's still on the map. Don't try to land at the Harrow Airport. That was everyone around here that's older said, oh, that's Ralph Howling's old strip. So everybody used to keep a lot of people kept their airplanes out at Ralph Howling's strip out by Harrow. But now it's all kind of overgrown and hay and straw. And like, you don't want to land there. It's not maintained, basically. And it's cut right in between trees too. But hey, Chad, welcome to the show. So so Roger there, he was keeping his plane out at Ralph Howling's place, and he was coming back from somewhere, he said, oh yeah, I came back. He said, oh, I had an engine failure out at Ralph Howling's place. I was like, what? Because I was talking to him about, oh yeah, I had an engine failure there. I'm like, whoa, us air pilots, we don't like hearing about engine failures too much. So he says, oh, it was no big deal because I was on the ground. I was like, what? How do you have an engine failure on the ground there, Roger? Oh, well, I was flying back from this one place. I forget where he said he was coming back from. Yeah, I noticed that the oil pressure was getting a little low in the plane. And then the temperature was getting up there a little bit. And I'm thinking to myself, that means you got no oil, man. Like your engine's going to seize. And like the way he was describing it, he could have landed at any little airport along the way. He's like, I just wanted to get home. So he made it home, and he's like, oh, I was keeping an eye on it. Well, yeah, you can keep an eye on it until your propeller stops. Okay, whatever, Roger. So he came back, and he went back home, had a nap or whatever, slept, came back the next morning. And so it was bothering him what was wrong with the engine. So he just went back to the little airstrip, and so he said he was sitting there revving up the engine, trying to look at the gauges and stuff. And he says, and then the propeller just stopped. And he was like, yeah, the wife wasn't too happy about me paying 20 grand for a new engine. Okay, Roger. Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. But so I did go flying with him when he turned 80 because his insurance company wanted him to do a flight with an instructor to say this guy's safe to go. Like, you don't have to be perfect for that, but like if I put my signature on somebody saying, yeah, this person's good to go, I got to know that they're safe, because if anything happens, it's like, hey, you said he was safe. It's like, and I don't want to say like, he made a mistake that day, but in my mind, I would know, he's not safe. So I just can't live with that. So I went flying with Roger, and so we get in his plane, fired up, and there was no like intercom in between us. Like usually you put on your headset and you can just kind of talk as an intercom. I was like, Roger, hey Roger, because the engine's really loud, right? You got an intercom in this? So he says, oh yeah. So what he would do, he would put it on the ATIS, which is like it's like a recording that tells you information about the weather and or around the weather around the airport, runway conditions, things like that. He says, oh yeah, you just put it on this frequency and hit the button, and then I can hear you. And I was like, but I'm thinking to myself, that's weird. It's like, so like I'm transmitting on the ATIS frequency, but no one's listening to it, and it's stepping on somebody. Like, I don't know. It's a weird thing. Roger just had it figured out in his head. This works. Okay, I'll keep the old guy. He never flew with anyone anyways after a certain age. So okay, whatever, Roger. And then so we figured out that. And then so we were going out to taxi out, and I'm like, he goes to do what they call a run up. So the run up, you stop, you rev up the engine, you check a few things out, make sure you're good to go before you go flying. If there's a problem, you just taxi back, and no big deal. You don't have to deal with it in the air. So he stopped, goes to do some kind of run up, and he was doing what he normally did, and it's like, okay, he checked that, that's important. He checked that, that's important. Check that, that's really important. I'm looking here, all the gauges are looking green. Okay, this guy's looking good. And I asked him, hey, Roger, do you ever use a checklist or anything like that? He's like, oh, yeah, I got one of those here somewhere. So he's sitting there fishing through. He's got his pocket over here with, I don't know, some 20-year-old map and some stuff. He pulls out this some laminated kind of checklist thing that I know he's not using. But he didn't check anything, like just from memory. He checked everything you need to. But he whips out this checklist because he's kind of like, oh, this guy's not going to sign me off, right? I better use this checklist. And I'm looking at the checklist. It's not even for his airplane type. It's like Cessna 152. This is a Cessna 150, not a 152. And like, okay. And he skipped over a bunch of stuff. And it was like, okay, Roger, let's just go. And then, so we went up flying around. And stopped in at another little grass strip, like he landed. And so at this little grass strip, which he was just, and like he was coming in over the wires tight, man. It was just like, whoa, oh my God. Jesus, Roger, you're going to hang us up on the wires here. But he did it so many millions of times. It was just like, okay, I know theoretically we should clear these wires. And we did. So yeah, you can kind of tell, like as long as something is going down on the windshield, you know you're going over top of it. If something is moving up on your windshield, that means you're going to go underneath it. If it's staying right in the same spot on your windshield, you will definitely hit it. That's what you do. So the wires were coming down, and we just got over them. So I was like, but yeah. So we landed at this little grass strip. Said hi to his buddy Armel, nice guy. Actually, my nose is running here. Excuse me. A little bit. All right. Must be cold down here. So anyways, yeah, we go in there. So, okay, I checked that off on my little checklist. Okay, yeah, you can do short field landing, soft field landing. We did that. Radio work, good enough for today. So they're checking off all these things. And I said, client, we're going back. Had him do some other little things that you should know how to do as a pilot. He did them okay. But it came time for me to test him, I guess, on a simulated forced approach. So it means like, oh, if your engine quits, can you glide it into a field without an engine? And then so you do that. And then once you get pretty close, you know you can make the field, just give her the gas and take off again, and away you go. So Roger, and usually, you know, there's different techniques to get your way to size your way up to get into a farmer's field if you had to. But I was flying with Roger, and I'm like, okay, Roger, I got to give you a simulated engine failure. And he's like, oh, I haven't done one of those in years. I'm like, well, we'll see how you do. So you put on some carburetor heat and you pull the engine out to idle. And I say, okay, pick a field and land in it. Doesn't matter which one. He's like, okay. So we're up at like 3,000 feet. So what's that? 3,500. We're probably about 3,000 feet above the ground. And then he just like picks a field that's like right down underneath us. And I was like, well, I'm like, are you going to go like kind of circle around and then go into the field? Or You're just going to kind of join it like joining a pattern or a circuit. You're going to, it's like, no, I'm just going to get it in there straight in. I'm like, what? But so what he did is this plane, it would drop like a rock. Like he put on like 40 degrees of flap, gave it a great big full forward slip, and this plane just went straight down into this field, or like towards the field. I've never, I didn't know a plane could go that steep into it. And like, if there was an engine failure, he would have made it, no problem. So I'm like, okay, that's probably one of the most unconventional, strangest forced approaches I've ever seen, but it would have been successful. So, I mean, this guy really, he would wear this airplane. Like, he just knew how to make it do what he wanted, just like working his excavator and stuff like that. He could just do it. So, old Roger there. So eventually there, Roger, he did fly the plane after that a little bit, but he said he was kind of forgetting a few little things here and there. And it was getting hard for him to get in and out of the airplane, so he ended up selling it. And then, so he sold the plane. He would still pop in every once in a while to out at the airport here and there. And all that it was kind of a surprise when he passed away that I heard about it, because I just saw him like a month ago, and at that point he had some problems with circulation and stuff like that. So at that point he was in kind of an electric little scooter wheelchair. And like the last time I saw, like every month they usually have a barbecue there at the Canadian Aviation Museum. So I was in there. Oh, hey Roger. Yeah. He's like, oh, how are you? Yeah. So nice to see you. And then he's gone. So, but the last time I saw him, I sat down, he's sitting there in his wheelchair, and he said, well, I got to go. He just does this really quick 180. He's off, right? So he could even handle a wheelchair too. So I was like, that's the last time I saw Roger. And so there we go. Little tribute to Roger Deschamps. And he was, a really good guy. And he could fly well. He wasn't the greatest on the radio and stuff like that, but he was very good with the plane. So, anyways, nice knowing you, Roger. See you one day. So that's about it for today. I'll just check a few little questions, comments over here and pack it in. What do we got here? Yeah, Wrench is saying that VFR on top is scary. Yeah, if you don't have the right navigation equipment, you're not sure what the weather's like at your destination. That's if you're on top, you're going to be popping through a cloud at some point if you do that long enough. Put it that way. Oh, there we go. Okay, in his bio, Miracles Out of Somewhere, Kerry Livgren, leader of the band Kansas, was VFR. Running out of fuel, went blind in the cloud. Descent came down right on top of destination runway. Well, gets pretty lucky. Yeah, there we go. And even Chad Elkins, CPA, tune into the Chad Elkins Accounting Hour. Chad Elkins has his YouTube channel. I've interviewed him before. If you want to learn all about accounting, you talk to Chad. So sometimes Chad has problems handling how awesome superpilotish is. Wow, I agree, Chad. I just figured I always put compliments up there because it's cool. Anyways, yeah, that's about it for today. Little tribute to old Roger there. And that's about it. So I'll be back on Wednesday, because I do this Monday, Wednesday, Friday at noon Eastern, and we'll kind of shut her down. So fly safe, and thank you for watching. Bye.